The ink on the divorce papers hadn't even dried when Paxton threw the pen across the mahogany table. He didn't just want to leave her, he wanted to crush her. He looked at the woman who had stood by him for 5 years, wearing her frayed cardigan and scuffed sneakers, and told her she was an anchor, dragging him to the bottom of the ocean. He called her broke, ambitionless, and plain. He thought he was cutting off dead weight to finally soar. He had no idea that the dead weight he was discarding was the only reason his plane had ever left the ground. Paxton was about to learn that some people don't flaunt their wealth because they are too busy owning the sky. The conference room on the 42nd floor of the chaotic Manhattan high-rise smelled of stale coffee and aggressive cologne. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the gray skyline of New York City into a watercolor of gloom, mirroring the atmosphere inside. Paxton Walsh sat at the head of the table, checking his reflection in the dark screen of his iPhone. He adjusted his silk tie, a Hermes print that had cost more than his wife's entire wardrobe, and sighed theatrically. He checked the time on his Patek Philippe Nautilus, making sure the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, saw the gesture. "Are we done yet?" Paxton asked, his voice dripping with boredom. "I have a lunch reservation at Le Bernardin in 40 minutes. I'd hate to lose the table because Genevieve can't find a pen that works." At the far end of the table sat Genevieve. She looked small in the oversized leather chair. She was wearing a beige knitted sweater that had seen better days, jeans that were fading at the knees, and canvas sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, secured with a simple black elastic. To anyone looking at them, Paxton was the master of the universe, a rising star in private equity, and Genevieve was the mistake he had made in his 20s. "I'm reading the clause regarding the apartment, Paxton," Genevieve said softly. Her voice was steady, lacking the hysteria Paxton had secretly hoped for. He wanted tears. He wanted begging. He wanted her to acknowledge that without him, she was nothing. "The apartment is mine, Jen," Paxton snapped, leaning forward. "I paid the mortgage. I paid the maintenance fees you paid for." "What? The groceries? Sometimes? Just sign the waiver. You get the lump sum we agreed on, which, frankly, is charity considering you've contributed 0 to my net worth and you walk away." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mrs. Walsh, the settlement offer is quite final. Mr. Walsh is offering you $50,000 to vacate the premises by the 1st of the month and waive all claims to future earnings or spousal support." $50,000. In New York City, that was barely breathing room. But Paxton knew she would take it. She hated conflict. She hated the flash and the noise of his world. "You're doing this because of Tiffany, aren't you?" Genevieve asked, finally looking up. Her eyes were a piercing green, the only sharp thing about her soft demeanor. Paxton scoffed, leaning back and crossing his arms. "I'm doing this because I've outgrown you, Genevieve. Look at you. Look at me." He gestured to his bespoke suit. "I'm closing deals with Fortune 500 companies. I need a partner who fits the part. Someone who can host a gala, not someone who thinks dressing up means wearing a clean t-shirt. You're stagnant. You're broke, General. Not just financially, but spiritually. You have no drive." "Drive," she repeated, tasting the word like it was sour milk. "Yes, drive. I need someone who understands the value of a dollar and how to multiply it. You're content with mediocrity. It's embarrassing." Paxton stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Tiffany isn't the reason. She's just the wake-up call. She runs her own PR firm. She drives a G-Wagon. She matches my energy. You're just there." Genevieve looked at the papers. For a fleeting second, a strange expression crossed her face. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't anger. It looked almost like pity. "Okay, Paxton," she said, picking up the pen. "Okay?" He blinked, surprised by the sudden capitulation. "If you think I'm holding you back, I'll let you go." She signed the document with a flourish that seemed too elegant for a broke housewife. She pushed the papers toward the lawyer. "I don't want the 50,000. Paxton laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Don't be a martyr, General. You can't afford to be proud. How are you going to live? Go back to that little Etsy shop of yours? Selling painted rocks?" "I'll figure it out," she said, standing up. She picked up her canvas tote bag. "I always do." "Suit yourself," Paxton sneered. "Just make sure your stuff is out of the penthouse by Friday. Tiffany wants to redecorate. She says the energy is too depressing in there." Genevieve walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the brass handle. She didn't look back. Good luck with the merger, Paxton. I heard the Sterling Group is notoriously difficult to please. Paxton froze. He hadn't told her about the Sterling Group deal. That was the biggest deal of his career, a takeover that would launch him into the 8-figure club. How did she know? I read it in the paper, she added quickly, as if reading his mind, before slipping out the door. Paxton shook his head, dismissing the momentary unease. She reads the Financial Times? Please. She probably saw the logo on my iPad. He turned to his lawyer, a shark-like grin spreading across his face. It's done. I'm free. He walked out of the office and into the elevator, checking his phone. A text from Tiffany popped up. Did the deadweight drop? Dinner at Nobu tonight to celebrate? Paxton typed back. Signed, sealed, delivered. Order the most expensive steak they have. He didn't know it yet, but he had just signed away his safety net. 3 months had passed since the divorce was finalized. For Paxton, life was a blur of high-end restaurants, bottle service at marquee clubs, and the intoxicating rush of unchecked freedom. Tiffany was exactly the kind of ornament he had always wanted. She was loud, she was flashy, and she demanded attention. He loved the way men looked at him when she walked into a room on his arm, dripping in the jewelry he had bought her on credit. He ignored the mounting American Express bills. He was Paxton Walsh. The Sterling Group deal was approaching, and once that commission hit, the debt would vanish like smoke. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Paxton saw her again. He was walking down Fifth Avenue with Tiffany, heading toward Tiffany & Co., a destination she found amusingly eponymous, to look at engagement rings. It was raining again, a cold, biting drizzle that made the city feel hostile. Ugh, this weather is hideous, Tiffany complained, pulling her faux fur coat tighter. We should have taken the car, Paxton. The driver was 5 minutes away, Tiff. Walking builds character, Paxton joked, though he was annoyed that the rain was spotting his Italian loafers. They were waiting at a crosswalk when a bus pulled up, splashing a murky puddle onto the sidewalk. The doors hissed open, and a crowd of commuters spilled out. Gross, Tiffany muttered, stepping back. And then Paxton saw her. Genevieve. She was stepping off the bus, struggling with 2 large, reusable grocery bags that looked heavy. She was wearing a yellow raincoat that was at least 3 sizes too big, and rain boots that were covered in mud. She looked exhausted. Her hair was wet, plastered to her forehead. Paxton felt a surge of vindication so potent it almost felt like a drug. Look, he whispered to Tiffany, nudging her. Look who it is. Tiffany squinted. Who? The bag lady? That is my ex-wife. Tiffany gasped, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. No way. That? Oh my God, Paxton. You literally saved your life. She looks like she's about to ask us for change. Paxton couldn't resist. The light was still red. He stepped forward, blocking Genevieve's path as she tried to navigate through the crowd. Genevieve, he called out, his voice booming with false conviviality. She stopped, looking up. Rainwater dripped from the brim of her hood. She blinked, her green eyes widening slightly. Paxton. Hello. Caught in the rain? He gestured to the bus as it roared away, spewing exhaust. I see the private transport isn't treating you well. It gets me from A to B, she said simply, shifting the weight of the bags. And where is B these days? Paxton smirked. Still painting rocks? Actually, Genevieve said, her voice calm. I'm doing some consulting work. Research. Mostly. Research? Tiffany chimed in, stepping up beside Paxton and linking her arm through his possessively. Like, for a library? She laughed, a high, tinkling sound that grated on the ears. Hi, I'm Tiffany. I've heard so little about you. Hello, Tiffany, Genevieve said politely. I'm sure Paxton has been very busy. Incredibly, Paxton bragged. We're actually looking at rings. And next week, we're flying to Aspen. The Sterling Group Summit. I'm finally closing the big one, General. I'm going to be a partner by Christmas. He watched her face for a reaction. He wanted envy. He wanted her to look at Tiffany's designer coat and his tailored suit and feel the weight of her own poverty. Genevieve just nodded. Aspen, the Wintershell Summit, right? How do you know the name of the summit? Paxton frowned. I keep up with the news, Paxton. You know that. She adjusted her grip on the bags. Be careful in Aspen. The weather can be unpredictable this time of year. And the airfield. The crosswinds are tricky for smaller jets. Paxton laughed incredulously. I think the pilot can handle it, General. We aren't flying coach. We're chartering a Learjet. Of course, she said. Well, I have to go. My client is waiting for these. She gestured to the bags. What's in the bags, Jen? Paxton asked, peering closer. Cleaning supplies? Are you cleaning houses now? She looked down at the bags. Something like that. Cleaning up messes. Here, Paxton said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a $20 bill. Take a cab for the rest of the way. Seriously, it's embarrassing to see you like this. Genevieve looked at the money in his hand. For a moment, the air between them crackled with tension. Tiffany stifled a giggle. Genevieve reached out, took the bill, and slowly tucked it into Paxton's breast pocket. Keep it, Paxton, she said softly. You're going to need every penny where you're going. Before he could respond to the cryptic remark, she turned and disappeared into the throng of pedestrians, a splash of yellow in a sea of gray. What a weirdo, Tiffany said, shaking her head. She's totally bitter. Totally, Paxton agreed, patting his pocket where the $20 bill still sat. But as they walked into the warmth of Tiffany and Co., a cold knot of anxiety formed in his stomach. You're going to need every penny. Why did she sound like she knew something he didn't? Forget her, Paxton muttered to himself. She's nobody. She's the past. He focused on the diamonds in the display case. He was Paxton Walsh. He was a winner. And winners didn't worry about women who took the bus. The weeks leading up to the Aspen Summit were a whirlwind of stress and anticipation. The Sterling Group deal was the holy grail of Paxton's firm, Vertex Capital. The Sterling family was notoriously private, an old money dynasty with holdings in shipping, tech, and aerospace. They were looking for a new firm to manage a portfolio worth $3 billion. Paxton had secured the meeting through sheer tenacity, badgering the Sterling family's lower-level executives for months. He had never met the CEO, a figure shrouded in mystery who supposedly took over the empire 5 years ago after the patriarch passed away. Rumors swirled that the CEO was eccentric, reclusive, and ruthless. If you land this, his boss, an overweight man named Gormley, had told him, "You're not just a partner, Paxton. You're a legend. But don't screw it up. These people smell fear, and they smell cheapness." Paxton took that to heart. He leveraged his credit cards to the max. He booked the best suite at the Little Nell in Aspen. He bought Tiffany a new wardrobe for the trip. He chartered a Learjet 45 for the flight out. It was expensive, painfully so, but appearances were everything. The morning of the flight, the Teterboro Airport terminal was buzzing with the elite. Paxton stood by the window, sipping an espresso, watching the private jets taxi on the tarmac. There she is, he said, pointing as the sleek Learjet was towed into position. Not bad, huh? Tiffany didn't look up from her phone. Babe, the Wi-Fi better be fast. I need to live stream the takeoff. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the private terminal shifted. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Even the ground crew outside seemed to pause in their tracks. Descending from the clouds like a silver bird of prey was a monster of a machine. It wasn't a Learjet. It wasn't even a standard Gulfstream. Holy, Paxton breathed. It was a Bombardier Global 7500, the pinnacle of long-range business jets. It was massive, sleek, and painted in a custom matte midnight blue with silver accents. It dwarfed the other planes on the tarmac. Whose is that? Tiffany asked, finally looking up. It's huge. That, Paxton whispered, is $100 million aircraft. That's a flying palace. That belongs to a head of state or a billionaire. The massive jet taxied smoothly, coming to a halt not far from where Paxton's modest Learjet sat. The contrast was humiliating. The Learjet looked like a toy car next to a tank. Maybe it's the Sterling CEO, Paxton mused, his heart racing. They're supposed to be in Aspen for the summit. Go introduce yourself, Tiffany urged, pushing him. Network, babe. You can't just walk up to a Global 7500. Tiff, Paxton snapped. Security will tackle you. He watched, transfixed, as the stairs of the massive jet automatically unfolded. A team of flight attendants in crisp Navy uniforms descended first, laying out a literal red carpet on the wet tarmac. A black SUV with tinted windows rolled up to the plane's stairs immediately. Look at the tail number, Paxton squinted. N1SG. SG, Paxton muttered. Sterling Group? It has to be. The door of the jet opened fully. Paxton held his breath, waiting to see the titan of industry he was desperate to impress. He expected an old man in a suit, or perhaps a tech bro in a hoodie, but no one came out. Instead, the pilot, a distinguished man with silver hair and 4 gold stripes on his epaulets, walked down the stairs and stood by the SUV. He opened the back door of the car. A woman stepped out of the car. She was wearing oversized sunglasses, a trench coat that looked like it was cut from clouds, and a scarf that trailed in the wind. She didn't look like a business tycoon. She looked like a movie star. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, handing a bag to the pilot. The pilot, Captain Harrison, Paxton noted from the embroidery on his jacket, bowed his head respectfully and laughed at something she said. It was a familiar, warm interaction. "Who is she?" Tiffany asked, jealous. "I don't know," Paxton said, straining his eyes. "A mistress? A daughter?" The woman turned slightly, catching the light. For a split second, Paxton felt a jolt of recognition. Something about the posture. Something about the way she held her head. But then she turned away, ascending the stairs of the Global 7500 with the grace of a queen boarding her throne. The door sealed shut. The massive engine spooled up, a deep, earth-shaking hum that vibrated the glass of the terminal. "Come on, Mr. Walsh," the pilot of his chartered Learjet called out, breaking Paxton's trance. "We need to clear out before the big boy blasts us with jet wash." Paxton followed Tiffany toward their small plane, but he couldn't stop looking back at the midnight blue giant. N1SG, he repeated to himself. He boarded his cramped jet, buckling his seatbelt. He felt small. He felt poor. And for some reason, he felt that same cold knot of anxiety he had felt on Fifth Avenue when Genevieve had given him the $20. "Champagne?" the flight attendant asked. "Double," Paxton said. "I have a feeling this is going to be a long weekend." Aspen, Colorado, greeted them with a wall of white. The descent into the valley had been treacherous. The small Learjet had bucked and swayed in the crosswinds, causing Tiffany to spill her mimosa and scream twice. Paxton had gripped the armrests until his knuckles turned white, his mind flashing back to Genevieve's warning on the street corner. The crosswinds are tricky for smaller jets. How did she know? The question nagged at him like a splinter. When they finally taxied to the private hangar, Paxton's anxiety spiked again. The massive midnight blue Global 7500 was parked in the premier spot, hooked up to ground power, looking like a sleeping beast. A fleet of black Cadillac Escalades surrounded it, men in earpieces moving with military precision. "Who is that?" Tiffany whined, shivering in her thin leggings as they stepped onto the snowy tarmac. "They're taking up all the space." "Quiet, Tiff," Paxton hissed. "That's power, real power. Try not to stare." They took the courtesy shuttle to the Little Nell, the only 5-star, ski-in, ski-out hotel in Aspen. Paxton had stretched his credit limit to the breaking point to book a junior suite, hoping the address would impress the Sterling executives. The lobby was a warm, golden-lit haven smelling of pine, expensive leather, and wood smoke. Paxton strode to the reception desk, slapping his platinum Amex on the marble. "Paxton Walsh, checking in." The concierge, a young man with a flawless smile, typed for a moment and then frowned. "Ah, Mr. Walsh, yes. We have you in, room 204. A lovely courtyard view." Paxton froze. "Courtyard?" "I booked a mountain view suite. I need the balcony facing the slopes. I'm afraid we had to reallocate some inventory due to a VIP buyout of the top 2 floors," the concierge said apologetically. "We are fully committed." "A buyout?" Paxton's voice rose. "Do you know who I'm here to meet?" "The Sterling Group." "I need to look the part." The concierge lowered his voice, leaning in. "Mr. Walsh, the Sterling Group is the one who bought out the penthouse in the floors below. The CEO requires absolute privacy. Her security team locked down the best suites 3 months ago." "Here, the CEO is a woman?" Paxton asked, surprised. He had assumed the successor was a son or a nephew. "Yes, sir. Very private, very specific tastes." The concierge slid the key card across the desk. "Enjoy your stay." Paxton grabbed the key, fuming. He walked past the bar, where captains of industry were sipping 20-year-old scotch. He felt like an imposter. He dragged his Rimowa suitcase toward the elevator, Tiffany trailing behind him, complaining about the lack of bellboys. That evening, the welcome mixer was held in the hotel's private ballroom. This was it. The proving ground. Paxton dressed in his tuxedo, checking his reflection. He looked good, sharp, successful. He gave himself a pep talk in the mirror. You are a partner at Vertex. You generated $4 million in revenue last year. You belong here. He didn't mention to his reflection that he was currently carrying $80,000 in credit card debt and paying alimony to a woman he despised. The ballroom was glittering with chandeliers and filled with the murmur of billionaires. Paxton worked the room, clutching a crystal tumbler of whiskey. He saw faces he recognized from the Wall Street Journal. There was the CEO of Techstar. There was the founder of Redline Shipping. And then, a hush fell over the room. The double doors at the far end swung open. Security guards in black suits stepped in first, scanning the crowd. Is that her? Tiffany whispered, clutching Paxton's arm. The Dragon Lady? A woman entered. She was surrounded by a phalanx of advisors, so it was hard to see her clearly. She wore a backless emerald green gown that shimmered like liquid money. Her hair was styled in an elegant, intricate updo. She moved with a fluidity that commanded attention without demanding it. She didn't stop to chat. She moved straight toward the VIP section, a roped-off area raised slightly above the rest of the floor. Paxton stood on his toes, trying to catch a glimpse of her face. He saw the back of her neck, the flash of diamonds at her throat. She looks familiar, Paxton muttered, the alcohol buzzing in his head. Everyone looks familiar to you. Tiffany scoffed, bored. Can we go? The vibe here is too stiff. I want to go to the club downtown. We are not going to a club, Tiffany. I need to shake hands with someone from her team. Paxton abandoned Tiffany by the chocolate fountain and pushed his way toward the rope line. He spotted a man he recognized, Marcus Thorne, the CFO of the Sterling Group. This was his chance. Mr. Thorne, Paxton called out, flashing his best salesman smile. Paxton Walsh, Vertex Capital. Thorne, a silver-haired man with eyes like flint, turned slowly. He looked Paxton up and down. Vertex? Ah, yes, Gormley's boy. I'm leading the pitch tomorrow, Paxton said, extending his hand. Thorne didn't take it. Are you now? Thorne took a sip of his drink. We've heard interesting things about Vertex. Aggressive. Hungry. We get results, Paxton said, puffing out his chest. We value integrity above results, Mr. Walsh, Thorne said coolly. Our chairwoman is very particular about the character of the people managing her family's legacy. She has an uncanny ability to spot a fake. Paxton felt a bead of sweat trickle down his back. Well, I look forward to meeting her. Thorne smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Oh, you will. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. She hates tardiness, and she hates excuses. Thorne turned his back, effectively dismissing him. Paxton retreated, his heart hammering. He felt like he was walking on a tightrope over a canyon. He found Tiffany, grabbed her arm, and marched her toward the exit. Ow, what is your problem? She snapped. We're going to bed, Paxton growled. I need to be perfect tomorrow. My life depends on it. As they waited for the elevator, Paxton looked back at the VIP section. The woman in the green dress turned slightly. For a second, he saw her profile. A shiver went down his spine. It couldn't be. The nose, the chin. It looked exactly like Genevieve. But Genevieve was in New York, probably eating ramen in a studio apartment. This woman was dripping in diamonds worth more than Paxton's entire existence. It's just the stress, he told himself. Get a grip, Walsh. The conference room the next morning was more like a tribunal. The long table was made of black marble, polished to a mirror shine. The windows looked out over the pristine, snow-covered Rockies, but the temperature inside the room felt colder than the air outside. Paxton sat on the left side of the table, flanked by two junior analysts from his firm who looked terrified. He had his presentation loaded on the iPad, his charts perfected, his opening lines rehearsed. On the right side sat the Sterling Group executives, Marcus Thorne, the legal counsel and the head of operations. But the chair at the head of the table, the throne, was empty. The chairwoman will be joining us shortly, Thorne said, checking his watch. She is concluding a call with the Prime Minister of Japan. Paxton swallowed hard. The Prime Minister. He adjusted his tie. His hands were shaking slightly. He hid them under the table. The heavy oak doors opened. "All rise," a security guard announced, as if it were a court of law. Everyone stood up. Paxton smoothed his jacket, his eyes glued to the door. The click-clack of heels on the hardwood floor echoed like gunshots. First came the scent, a subtle mix of jasmine and expensive vanilla. It hit Paxton's nose before he even saw her. It was a scent he knew. A scent he hadn't smelled in 3 months. A scent that used to be on the pillow next to him every morning. No. Then, she walked in. She was wearing a white power suit, tailored to absolute perfection. It fit her like armor. Her hair was down, cascading in soft waves around her shoulders. She wore no jewelry except for a simple, vintage gold watch on her wrist. She walked to the head of the table and placed a leather folio down. She didn't look at the executives. She didn't look at the view. She looked directly at Paxton. Paxton's legs gave out. He collapsed back into his chair, his mouth falling open. The air left his lungs in a painful wheeze. It was Genevieve. Not the Genevieve in the oversized sweater. Not the Genevieve with the messy bun. This was a Genevieve carved from ice and steel. Her green eyes, usually so soft and pleading, were now sharp, assessing, and utterly terrifying. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said. Her voice was the same, yet completely different. It held a frequency of authority that Paxton had never heard before. Mrs. Walsh?" The junior analyst next to Paxton stammered, confused. He had met Genevieve once at the office Christmas party. "Miss Sterling," she corrected, not breaking eye contact with Paxton. "My name is Genevieve Sterling." Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. You could hear the hum of the hard drives in the laptops. Paxton felt like the room was spinning. "Sterling?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "But you told me your maiden name was Miller." "I used my mother's maiden name," she said calmly, sitting down, "to ensure that the people in my life loved me for me and not for the $3 billion attached to my signature." She laced her fingers together and leaned forward. "A test," she added, a small, cold smile playing on her lips. "Which, as we all know, you failed spectacularly." Paxton couldn't breathe. His mind was racing, replaying the last 5 years. The dusty apartment, the budgeting, the way he had scolded her for buying expensive organic milk, the way he had given her an allowance. She was a Sterling. She owned the building he lived in. She probably owned the bank that held his credit card debt. I don't understand," Paxton stammered. "The apartment, the bus, the clothes. I live simply because I enjoy it, Paxton," she said. "I don't need a G-Wagon to know who I am. But when I need to step up, I step up." She gestured to the room, to the hotel, to the invisible jet parked outside. "Now," she continued, opening the folio. "Vertex Capital, you're here to pitch me on why you should manage the Sterling Family Trust." Marcus Thorne leaned over and whispered something to her. She nodded. "I've read your proposal, Paxton," she said. "It's aggressive, high risk, high reward, typical of your style. It's a solid strategy." Paxton managed to choke out, trying to salvage the shreds of his career. "We outperform the market by 12%. I know the numbers," she cut him off. "I also know the man behind the numbers." She stood up and walked slowly around the table, stopping right behind Paxton's chair. He could feel the heat radiating from her. He smelled that jasmine scent again, and it made him want to vomit with regret. "You see, gentlemen," she addressed the room, her hand resting lightly on the back of Paxton's chair. "Mr. Walsh here is a man who values optics over substance. He discards assets he deems underperforming without understanding their true value. He lacks patience, he lacks loyalty, and he lacks vision." She leaned down, her lips inches from his ear. "He divorced his wife because he thought she was broke. He threw her away like garbage to chase a shiny new object." She straightened up, walking back to the head of the table. "If a man treats his life partner like a liability to be liquidated," Genevieve said, her voice ringing with steel, "how do you think he will treat my family's money when the market dips? Will he panic? Will he cut and run? Will he sell us out for the next shiny opportunity?" She looked at Marcus Thorne. "I think we have our answer." Thorne nodded solemnly. "Agreed, Madam Chairwoman. Genevieve closed the folio with a definitive snap. Proposal rejected, she said. Vertex Capital is blacklisted from all future Sterling Group dealings. And Paxton? Paxton looked up, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. I suggest you check your company email, she said. I believe Mr. Gormley has been watching the live stream of this meeting. My team made sure he had the link. Paxton's phone buzzed in his pocket. Then it buzzed again. And again. A torrent of notifications. You're done here, Genevieve said, pointing to the door. Get out of my boardroom. And get out of my town. Paxton stood up, his legs trembling. He grabbed his iPad. He didn't look at his colleagues. He couldn't look at Genevieve. He walked to the door, a broken man. Just as he reached the handle, Genevieve spoke one last time. Oh, and Paxton? He paused, not turning around. That $20 I gave you in New York? He remembered the bill he had scoffed at. I hope you kept it, she said, because the ride down from the mountain is expensive, and I just canceled your company credit card. Vertex is a subsidiary of a bank I acquired this morning. The blood drained from Paxton's face. He opened the door and stumbled out into the hallway, the sound of his own destruction ringing in his ears. The hallway outside the boardroom felt endless, a tunnel of shame stretching out before Paxton. His phone was vibrating so violently in his pocket it felt like a second heartbeat. He finally pulled it out. Incoming call. Gormley. Paxton stared at the screen. He knew he shouldn't answer, but habit forced his thumb to slide across the glass. Gormley. Listen, I can explain, Paxton started, his voice trembling. You're fired. Gormley's voice was a low growl, devoid of the usual bluster. Don't come back to the office. Don't log in. Security is already packing your desk into a box. You embarrassed me, Walsh. You embarrassed the firm in front of the biggest capital holder in the hemisphere. But, and Paxton? Gormley added, a cruel edge to his voice. I just got off the phone with legal. That non-compete clause you signed? We're enforcing it. You won't work in finance in New York for 2 years. Good luck flipping burgers. The line went dead. Paxton leaned against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He was hyperventilating, blacklisted, unemployed, broke. He needed to get to the room. He needed to get Tiffany. They had to leave before. He scrambled up and ran to the elevators, ignoring the strange looks from the hotel staff. When he burst into the suite, he expected to find Tiffany lounging on the bed, scrolling through Instagram. Instead, the room was a whirlwind of activity. Suitcases were open. Tiffany was throwing clothes into them with frantic speed. Tiff! Paxton gasped, loosening his tie. We have to go. Something bad happened. The deal. It didn't go through. Tiffany didn't look up. She was shoving her beauty products into a bag. I know. Twitter is blowing up, Paxton. Number Vertex fail is trending. People are saying you got destroyed by the secret Sterling heiress. She zipped up the bag with a harsh sound. She finally turned to look at him, her eyes cold and calculating. You told me you were going to be a partner, she said, her voice dripping with accusation. You told me you were rich. I will be, Paxton pleaded, grabbing her arm. This is just a setback. I can fix this. We just need to get back to New York and regroup. Tiffany shook his hand off as if he were contagious. There is no we, Paxton. I checked the credit card you gave me for the spa this morning. I checked the one for room service. Declined. She picked up her phone. So, I made a call. Who did you call? Paxton asked, a sinking feeling in his gut. There was a knock at the door. It wasn't hotel security. It was Chadwick, a hedge fund manager Paxton knew from the club scene in Manhattan. Chadwick was older, balding, and notoriously sleazy, but he was worth $50 million. Ready, babe? Chadwick asked, leaning against the doorframe, smirking at Paxton. Chadwick? Paxton looked between them. What is this? An upgrade, Tiffany said cruelly. She grabbed her bags and walked toward the door. She paused next to Paxton, looking him up and down with the same disdain Paxton had shown Genevieve months ago. You're a liability, Paxton, she said, echoing his own words. And I don't date liabilities. She walked out, linking arms with Chadwick. Let's go, Chad. This room smells like failure. Paxton was left alone in the silent suite. He walked to the window. Down below, he saw Chadwick's car, a Bentley, pull up. Tiffany got in. They drove away. Paxton walked to the minibar, He needed a drink. He grabbed a small bottle of vodka and cracked it open. Knock, knock. Mr. Walsh? It was the hotel manager, flanked by 2 security guards. We've been informed that the credit card on file has been reported as compromised by the issuing bank. We need you to settle the bill immediately, or we will have to escort you off the premises. How much is it? Paxton whispered. For the suite, the room service, and the spa treatments, Miss Tiffany ordered this morning. $11,000. Paxton laughed. It was a manic, broken sound. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out his wallet. It was empty of cash. His cards were plastic bricks. Then, his fingers brushed against something crinkled in his breast pocket. The $20 bill. The bill Genevieve had given him in the rain. He pulled it out and stared at Andrew Jackson's face. You're going to need every penny. I have $20, Paxton said, tears finally spilling over his cheeks. The manager sighed. Get his bags, boys. Put him on the street. 1 year later, the bell above the door of Stan's 24-hour eats jingled, a harsh, tinny sound that grated against Paxton's nerves like sandpaper. A blast of freezing November air accompanied the new customer, swirling with the smell of stale fryer grease and lemon-scented floor cleaner that permanently hung in the diner. Paxton Walsh, formerly a partner track executive at Vertex Capital, formerly a resident of a Manhattan penthouse, and formerly a man who wore $3,000 suits, looked down at his shoes. They were non-slip, orthopedic black loafers issued by the diner, and they were currently covered in a splatter of darker-than-dark coffee. Hey, Hollywood, table 4 needs a wipe down. You deaf? The voice belonged to Stan, the owner of the establishment, a man whose neck was wider than his head and who managed the diner with the compassion of a prison warden. I'm on it, Stan, Paxton said, his voice flat. It was a voice he had cultivated over the last 12 months, a voice designed to be invisible. He grabbed the gray, damp rag from the bucket of sanitizing solution. His hands, once manicured and soft from gripping expensive pens, were now red, chapped, and calloused. A burn scar ran across the back of his left hand, a souvenir from a splash of hot oil 3 months ago. He hadn't gone to the doctor. The deductible on his catastrophic health plan was higher than his monthly rent. As he wiped the Formica table, scrubbing at a stubborn circle of dried ketchup, Paxton's mind drifted to the phantom limb of his past life. It had been exactly 365 days since the Aspen incident. The fall hadn't been a slide. It had been a cliff dive. The Sterling Group's blacklisting had been absolute. Genevieve hadn't just closed a door. She had poured concrete over the entrance. The non-compete clause Gormley enforced was airtight, barring him from any financial institution in the tri-state area. But it wasn't just the job, it was the debts. When the salary stopped, the lifestyle didn't just pause, it collapsed. The Audi was repossessed in front of a Starbucks. The collection agencies called so often he had to change his number twice. He had sold his Patek Philippe watch for pennies on the dollar to a pawn shop in the Bronx, just to pay the security deposit on a basement studio apartment in Astoria, a room with one window that looked out onto a brick wall and a radiator that clanged like a dying engine. Coffee, black. And don't fill it to the brim. I got shaky hands. The customer at table 4 grunted. It was Mr. Henderson, not the lawyer, just a retired sanitation worker who came in every Tuesday. Sure thing, Mr. Henderson, Paxton mumbled. He walked behind the counter, the smell of burnt bacon assaulting his senses. He picked up the pot. Yo, turn that up, a guy at the counter shouted, pointing his fork at the television mounted in the corner. It's the business report. I want to see if my lottery ticket stocks are tanking. Paxton reached up and pressed the volume button on the TV, his heart doing a strange, fluttery kick in his chest. He hated the business news. It was a window into a world he had been exiled from. It was like a starving man watching a banquet through bulletproof glass. The screen flickered, showing the sleek, glass interior of the New York Stock Exchange. The anchor, a woman with perfect hair and a predatory smile, turned to the camera. Breaking news in the world of global finance, she announced, her voice crisp. The Sterling Group has just closed the largest clean energy acquisition in history, a deal valued at $4.2 billion. But the real story isn't the money, it's the woman behind the checkbook. Paxton froze. The coffee pot hovered over Mr. Henderson's mug. The image on the screen cut to a live feed from a press conference in Geneva. Flashbulbs popped like lightning storms. A sea of microphones bristled at the front of the stage. And there she was, Genevieve. Paxton felt the air leave his lungs. He hadn't seen her since that day in the boardroom. He expected her to look harder, colder, perhaps aged by the stress of running an empire. Instead, she looked luminous. She wasn't wearing the armor-like power suit from Aspen. She was wearing a soft, cream-colored turtleneck and a camel coat draped over her shoulders. Her hair was loose, catching the light. She looked accessible. She looked human. She looked like the woman he had married 5 years ago, only now, she carried herself with the terrifying confidence of someone who knows exactly who they are. "Miss Sterling," a reporter shouted from the throng. "Critics say this acquisition is too risky. They say you're pivoting away from the family's traditional conservative strategy. What do you say to the shareholders who are worried?" Paxton watched, mesmerized. He knew the old Genevieve would have shrunk from the aggression. She would have looked for him to answer. On the screen, Genevieve leaned into the microphone. She didn't blink. A small, knowing smile played on her lips. "Risk," Genevieve said, her voice echoing through the speakers of the diner, "is only a threat if you don't understand the asset. Too many people in this industry look at the surface. They look at the quarterly report, the balance sheet, the clothes someone is wearing. They judge value based on immediate return." She paused. And for a terrifying second, Paxton felt like she was looking through the camera lens, across the ocean, through the grease-stained screen of the TV, and directly into his soul. "I look for potential," she continued. "I look for resilience. The companies we acquired today have struggled. They've been undervalued. They've been called broken. But they have good bones. They have a mission. And with the right support, they won't just succeed, they will redefine the market." The crowd on the television burst into applause. "Damn," the guy at the counter whistled, chewing on a piece of toast. "She's sharp, and not bad to look at, either. That's a woman who knows what she's doing." "That's Genevieve Sterling," Mr. Henderson said, looking up from his paper. "I read about her. Her family owns half the shipping containers in Jersey. They say she took over after her husband tried to swindle her or something." Paxton's hand shook. A drop of hot coffee splashed onto the counter. "Swindle her?" The counter guy laughed. "Serious? What kind of moron tries to play a woman with that kind of juice?" "Some Wall Street hotshot," Mr. Henderson replied, shaking his head. "Article said he dumped her because he thought she was poor. Can you imagine? He divorced a billionaire because she shopped at Target. Guy must be the biggest idiot on the Eastern Seaboard." The words hit Paxton like physical blows. The biggest idiot on the Eastern Seaboard. He gripped the counter, his knuckles turning white. The shame was a physical heat, rising up his neck, burning his ears. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tell them, "It wasn't like that. I didn't know. She hid it from me." But he couldn't. Because he knew, deep down, that the money was just the excuse. He had left her because he was shallow. He had left her because he needed a mirror that made him look big, and Genevieve had been too honest a reflection. "Hey, Hollywood," Stan yelled from the kitchen window. "Stop daydreaming about the rich girl and refill the sugar dispensers. We got a rush coming in." "Yeah," Paxton whispered, his throat tight. "Yeah, okay." He turned away from the screen, but he couldn't block out her voice. "We are also announcing the Phoenix Grant," Genevieve was saying. "A fund specifically for people who have hit rock bottom. Because sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what you're actually worth." Paxton walked to the back of the diner, into the small, cramped employee locker room. He needed to breathe. The walls were closing in on him. He leaned against the metal lockers, sliding down until he hit the cold tile floor. He put his head in his hands. The silence of the locker room was broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. He reached into the pocket of his stained apron, his fingers brushed against paper. He pulled it out. It was a $20 bill. It wasn't crisp anymore. It was soft, wrinkled, and tearing at the edges. It had been in his pocket every day for a year. He had almost spent it a dozen times when he was hungry, when he needed subway fare, when he just wanted a beer to drown the noise in his head. But he never did. He smoothed the bill out on his knee. "Take a cab," he had told her. "It's embarrassing to see you like this." He remembered the look in her eyes when she handed it back. It wasn't anger. It was pity. She had known then what was coming. She had tried to warn him. "You're going to need every penny." She hadn't destroyed him. She had just let him destroy himself. She had stepped out of the way, and let his own arrogance be the guillotine. The door to the locker room banged open. It was Stan. "Walsh, what are you doing? Taking a nap?" "I got a table of 6 wanting burgers." "Get your ass out there." Paxton looked up. For the first time in a year, the fog of self-pity shifted slightly. He looked at the $20 bill. Then he looked at Stan. "I'm coming, Stan," Paxton said. But his voice was different. It wasn't the flat drone of a broken machine. It was quiet, but it was steady. He stood up. He carefully folded the $20 bill and placed it back in his pocket, right over his heart. It wasn't money anymore. It was a receipt for the life he had sold for cheap thrills. He walked back out into the diner. The business report was over. The TV was now playing a soap opera. The patrons were eating, arguing, laughing. Life was moving on. Paxton picked up his notepad. He walked to the table of 6. They were young, loud, wearing suits that looked cheap but flashy, the kind of suits he used to wear when he was 22 and hungry. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" Paxton asked. "Yeah, give us a round of beers," one of the young men said, snapping his fingers. "And make it quick. We're celebrating. Just closed a massive deal. We're going to be kings of this city." Paxton looked at the kid. He saw the arrogance in his eyes. He saw the cheap watch he was flashing, as if it were a Rolex. He saw the way he treated the waitress passing by. Paxton felt a strange sensation. It wasn't envy, it was sadness. "Congratulations," Paxton said softly. "Just be careful. The ride down is a lot faster than the climb up." The kid laughed, dismissing him. "Whatever, Grandpa. Just get the beers." Paxton walked away. He went to the window and looked out into the night. The rain had started again, turning the neon lights of Queens into blurry streaks of color. Far above the gritty streets, above the din of the diner and the noise of the city, a plane was crossing the sky. He could just see its blinking red lights against the darkness of the clouds. It was flying high, above the turbulence, heading somewhere expensive, somewhere far away. It might have been her. It might not have been. It didn't matter. Genevieve was in the sky. Paxton was on the ground. The balance sheet had been reconciled. He turned back to the counter, picked up the coffee pot, and went back to work. He had a long shift ahead of him, and for the first time in his life, he knew exactly what he was worth. $20 plus tips. And strangely, as he poured the coffee into the white ceramic mug, Paxton Walsh realized it was the first honest money he had ever earned. And that is the story of how Paxton Walsh learned the hardest lesson of his life. When you treat people like investments, you eventually go bankrupt. He thought he was discarding a broken stone, only to realize too late that he had thrown away a diamond. Paxton is still out there, working his way back up from zero, while Genevieve continues to soar, proving that true class doesn't scream, it whispers. If you enjoyed this story of karma and redemption, please hit that like button, it really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Question for the comments. Do you think Paxton deserved a second chance, or was his punishment exactly what he deserved? Let me know your thoughts down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.